Who is the most evil person you've ever met in your entire life? So, a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years, retired, and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper and tax preparer, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped them out with stocking the coolers or even running the register as long as I didn't sell any drinks or smokes. This all took place in the late 80s and early 90s. Now, the actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the date well because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I'd just gotten my learner's permit and my dad would let me drive him to and from work just to, get some experience on the road both at day and at night. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run the register, stock the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on I-75. This in itself was really strange because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere and was coming to use a phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and how she needed a ride up to the next big town up north from us. Ocala was a town? This is important. My dad lets her know that he's working and there's no way that he can take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she is looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and subtly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns back to my dad and points at me, asking if I can take her. My dad responded back that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally, I would have done it, even though it was illegal because I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Turns out he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he had seen her walking up the drive. Well, she screams at him for a minute, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she had slammed it. And then she stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back up to the interstate and then starts up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passes and I'm in my bedroom less than a week before my 16th birthday. Son, get back in here and look at this. I quickly run to the living room and see my dad pointing at the TV. I look at the mug picture of the lady up on the screen and immediately remember the lady who had been in the store. Turns out I almost gave a car ride to Eileen Wernos, who was later convicted of being a serial criminal and then later put down. Still have nightmares about what could have happened. Wow, his dad had a sixth sense, or maybe a seventh, for serial criminals. Story 2. I'm a criminal defense attorney and I've represented literally thousands of people over the course of nearly 2 decades of this work. The vast majority of them, even folks accused of serious felonies, are people who have made mistakes. Mostly their mistakes are fueled by bad habits. I could probably count the number of truly evil people I've encountered in my job on fewer than 2 hands. Then there's Eddie, of course, not his real name. And the thing about Eddie is that he creeped out the whole courtroom staff, clerks, court reporter, bailiffs, judge, ADAs, secretaries, everybody. These are people like me who work with people accused of committing crimes every day and don't get rattled by much. Of course, I had met and interviewed Eddie before the hearing we had to have where everybody else got to hear what he did and how he felt about it. Most people in similar situations are at least repentant about when they're caught. Whether they're truly sorry or not is an open question, but at least put on a show of being sorry. Not Eddie. And this wasn't Eddie's first rodeo. He had been convicted of at least 2 in the past. This time, the allegation was that he had moved in with a woman who had a child, and when the woman left to go to the store, had cornered the child in the laundry room. We know this because that's what he told the detective who interviewed him and recorded the interview. The detective, a young female who may have been handling her first crime investigation on her own, struggled in her testimony getting the recording into evidence because after that admission by Eddie, she tried to cut the interview off. She had everything she needed. Eddie, on the other hand, wasn't finished. He told her she didn't understand and kept talking for like another 15 minutes. At the end of the hearing, the judge, of course, found probable cause to hold him over for trial. As we moved to the next case, another one of my clients, who was also incarcerated, caught me and said, "That guy needs to find Jesus." And I couldn't agree more. I don't know what happened to Eddie because I moved on to a different job shortly after. Story 3. I had a stalker woman who I had never met. I ran into a guy I went to school with in 1980, yes, high school, at a bar in 2017, and I hadn't seen him in forever, and we took a picture. I posted it on my FB page and tagged him and said, "Look who I ran into after all these years." His ex-GF saw the pictures and things went downhill from there. She got my name, she got on my page, found friends and family. She started posting nasty stuff about me, posting pictures of people having intimacy, saying it was me. She wrote my name, address, and phone numbers on index cards and put them on 100 cars in a shopping center parking lot with, "For free intimacy, come see me." She sent nasty texts to my family and friends about me. She came to my job, I was a bartender at a casino, and stalked me there and told my bosses I was having intimacy with customers. She found out where my eldest daughter works and sent them a letter saying my daughter had AIDS, she's a nurse, and was having intimacy with her patients. She messaged my youngest daughter and told her to go end herself. My husband, married 20 years, he's been sick, is in a nursing home with ALS. She found out where he is and went there and walked the halls until she found his room. They have their names on the doors. He can't speak and was telling him I was cheating on him, and she took a picture of him in his bed and posted it on her page and said I gave him an STD and that's why he's passing away. She posted that she was going to take him out of the nursing home and take him to her house and take care of him, that he was going to divorce me and marry her. She filed false police reports on me, saying I pulled her out of her house and held the weapon to her while some man roughed her up in the front yard. She put bruises on herself and said I did it. She sat in front of my house numerous times. I got a 5-year restraining order on her in 2020. She got arrested in front of my house. She's crazy and dangerous. She needs to be locked up. I had to get GPS programs on all my cars to prove where I was. I live about 25 minutes from her in another town and county. Story 4. Wouter Basson. We saw him at a family restaurant in South Africa with his wife. I would not have known who he was because we don't learn about such figures in our history classes, but my mom instantly recognized him and we almost had to restrain her from harming him with a fork. Basically, he worked in secret with the apartheid government on their chemical and biological weapons. He provided chemical concoctions used to end hundreds of political and anti-apartheid opponents, including 200 members of SWAPO from Namibia, and was involved in countless acts of fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement in securing a distinction between the military and his operations. He is also well documented as having traveled internationally for the express purpose of gaining more information on chemical warfare and weapons. Due to botched court proceedings and trials against him, he never really paid the price for his actions, and he walks free to this day, having even run his own medical practice and illegally working at others till as recently as 2021. I hope he has the most painful, uncomfortable, and long-winded doom that any human has ever experienced. Story 5. Maybe not as evil as some people here, but when I worked security at Walmart, we had a quota of people we needed to catch per shift or our jobs would be on the line. My manager decided that since it was a slow day, she'd start picking on teens and obviously not well-off people, trying to call the police on them for taking a candy bar or a pack of $3 ground beef. It was to the point where she took an older lady who was extremely nice and came in often, usually buying clothes for the community center kids she helped supervise, into the back room over a misplaced pair of $5 gym shorts that she had forgotten to scan. She called the police and made a huge stink over it, and that was the day I walked out. I went to visit my parents in another state, ignored every call Walmart sent to me, and left a voicemail from my boss telling them exactly how I felt. It felt nice and was probably the best thing for my mental health because I was beginning to get very depressed working that piece of trash job. Screw Walmart and all their managers. Oh, I also had a manager while I was there who worked in the CS department who constantly tried to get girls' numbers like they want anything to do with your old self. Reported him multiple times, but since he was friends with the district, nothing ever came of my reports. Disgusting piece of garbage. Story 6. My wife's uncle used to mistreat his daughters, and yet nobody in her extended family did a thing about it. Didn't call the cops, didn't take him out back and roughen him up. Nope, just swept it under the rug. But personally, I encountered a guy who was almost as bad. A client who has to have been the most amoral person I ever met. The guy was a complete sociopath. The guy worked for a client of mine, the director of marketing for a restaurant chain. We did some good work for them, but I noticed something about this guy. If the most trivial problem happened, 2 minutes late for a meeting because of traffic, this guy could come unglued. But I just chalked that up to a personality tick, and hey, I'm pretty punctual, so we had a decent professional relationship. Well, he and his employer parted ways, and I had some spare space. So I called the guy up and offered to let him come in and use an office while he figures out his next move. The guy was gobsmacked by my offer. In retrospect, I guess he didn't understand how anyone could actually be generous and do something nice without automatically expecting a quid pro quo. So he moves in and occupies a desk. Because he had a long background in restaurants, he started to dink around with an idea for a restaurant format. He'd also written a guide to running a restaurant, so to help the guy out, I sit down and knock out a book proposal for him and help him send something like 90 queries to agents. Boom, fish on. An agent calls him within a couple of days, says that he has a publisher needing precisely that kind of book. We tweak his proposal and boom, again, he has a book deal. Things just don't happen that fast in publishing. He was just in the right place at the right time. So another agent comes along and offers this guy a slightly better deal. And this guy wants to dub agent number 1 for agent number 2. Really? Dude, he just landed you a deal. I told him what a mistake it would be. I should have taken my cue right then and there. Meanwhile, he keeps plunging ahead with a really stupid restaurant concept. He brings it to me and I say, you know what? I have a different idea. And came up with a support program for small restaurants. One that encompasses supplies, purchasing, marketing support, you name it. Something that delivers value for the small restaurateur. He immediately ran with it, giving me a 20% share in the idea. And I hooked him up with a seriously good corporate attorney, an incredibly well-connected attorney who has family money big time, the kind of guy who could have funded this entire venture with a couple of phone calls, or maybe just written a check. This guy was that wealthy and powerful. Well, things went well. For a month, he's moving ahead, half my team is coming up with the plan for investors, and it's looking like we're going to have a fantastic business idea. Well, the attorney was slated to call him one day at 2 in the afternoon about something. When the attorney doesn't call him at the dot of 2 p.m., I learned later that he had a client conference call run long. This guy calls the attorney's secretary and proceeds to roast her up and down for 5 minutes, using every word in the book. The attorney calls him up and fires him on the spot. The guy comes into my office and says, well, I might have screwed up, and relates the incident. I told him to call back immediately with a groveling apology, because not only was he in the wrong, but he also burned a massive bridge for no good reason at all. I never apologize, was his reply. Meanwhile, I'd used any number of connections with vendors to help get his venture off the ground, only to find, while going through the paperwork, that I had suddenly fallen off the list of shareholders. You know, the guy who supplied him with the idea and made all kinds of calls and had half my staff running around doing work for him. The guy who picked him up and dusted him off and got him a frickin' book contract. Well, I needed the other shareholders, his explanation went. Oh, and on top of that, I happened upon him and his former assistant on his desk early in the morning. They were both married. I tossed him out and suddenly I'm the worst person in the world. I picked up all those people I had wired into his new business venture, told them what happened and apologized. They all walked away immediately. And yet this guy spent telling a lot of people that somehow I was the bad guy in all this. Go figure. A few years later, I was catching an early flight and I bumped into him. He greeted me as if we were long-lost friends. I looked him up and down the way you would look at something particularly disgusting and kept on walking without a word. Story 7. I did a little stint in prison and got a job packing cutlery. I got paired off with this dude and we had good chats the first few days I worked with him. Then he started to tell me what he did on the outside. He was a handler and he explained his method of turning vulnerable girls into street workers by hooking them on smack, and even turned a girl's dad and took over his flat. He explained and boosted how he manipulated all the girls and used fear and intimidation and how to get the most out of them. What's worse is that you never see him coming. He was a specimen of a man. He was seriously good looking, could have been a top model or something. He was huge and built like Paulo Costa or Anthony Joshua, properly charming and disarming. He was how I describe a vampire, designed to be a perfect predator of humans. I could see how he could easily charm guys to work for him and girls to fall for him. He had insane charisma, but he was an utter sociopath and really dangerous. This was the kind of guy you hope to God that never walks into your daughter's life. Story 8. My grandmother from my dad's side, I won't trauma dump much, but to understand how vile she is, when my mom got out of the hospital after giving birth to my sister, she made her cook for like 20 people, sweep the roof, and much more. No one helped my mom from that mob of relatives from my dad's side. Back then, my dad worked a really busy job, so he only got home late and wasn't able to help. She also constantly envies me, my sisters, and my mom to my dad. Yes, envies. Her little grandkids. Even my youngest sister, who's only 9, whenever she or any of my sisters or I seem to have a good time or a conversation with our dad, she always tries to get in that conversation or scold us for something so we won't talk to him. I will skip out on the amount of drama she has caused and the insults that she had addressed. Too bad her other grandkids don't care about her and are kind of dumb with no achievements in life. I absolutely love my parents, though. Sounds like she's got a serious case of the green-eyed monster. Maybe she should try a hobby like knitting or crocheting, to keep her mind off of your family's happiness. Story 9. My dad injured both of his ankles and got handicap parking for a while. Well, he had to get a second handicap placard for the college campus he was on. One day, he goes out and there is a ticket on his windshield for expired tags. It was 1 day overdue. He hobbled over to security and said, "I need to pay this ticket and update my tag." A guy behind the counter in a security uniform grinned and said, "I knew you'd be coming in here. I saw that tag expiring and made sure to look for it today." My dad looked at him and said, "So, you saw my broken legs, trying to crutch around, and decided this was the correct course of action, making me come all the way over here and walk up those stairs? Not remind me when you saw it expiring? You a schmuck or something?" My dad said the guy just sat down and his manager came out and said we waive the ticket and have a good day. Story 10. Fortunately, he was also stupid. Danny, the dispatcher at my former taxi job, he thrived on conflict and loved creating hardship for both drivers and customers alike. I watched him deliberately send a taxi late because a woman emphasized how she couldn't be late for her doctor's appointment. He hung up and sort of chuckled and said, "Well, she's definitely going to be late now." He shortened my work and joked that he just wanted to see how long it would take me to go to jail for being behind on child support payments. As he was passing away from cancer, I was tempted to send his cancer a get well card for Danny. Story 11. A guy I used to know ended up going to jail for mistreating his girlfriend and her daughter over the course of a couple years. I was never really good friends with him, but I would see him around town as a teenager and we would say what's up and whatever. Apparently, it was really bad. I hadn't spoken to him in many years at this point, but he would harm his girlfriend and his girlfriend's daughter. Well, one day the girlfriend went to our au pair shop to get an oil change or something, and one of the employees saw the bruises on her and this absolute Chad of a guy called the cops. She told the cops everything, and he's been in jail ever since. Story 12. My best friend's dad, he would roughen up all 3 of the boys and their mom. He would get hammered on substances and trespass on random people's yards and destroy their property and steal their motor vehicles, crash them, and then ditch the scene. Once we all hit a certain age, the boys would ask me to hang out pretty often, not only because we all had a good time, but I've always been a lot larger than their dad and he almost never put his hands on them. I could see the bit of fear in their eyes any time I left to go back home. This man is the perfect embodiment of evil on earth. He's defeated passing away in severe car wrecks, coding, and cancer on multiple occasions. And after decades of this lifestyle, still roams our local city as a bum, getting hammered and destroying property. Seem to have negatively influenced the 2 younger brothers because they're slowly becoming their father, and they haven't had their sweet, caring mother to turn to because she passed about 12 years ago. Story 13. My mother-in-law, and I know it's trope for men to dislike their MILs, but she's never done anything to me directly. Instead, she routinely, physically, and emotionally has been cruel to my wife in ways we're still unpacking in our 30s. She emotionally manipulates, and we suspect baby trap my FIL. She has alienated every person that ever gave her kindness because she takes advantage of people. She's used her husband's chronic health issues to gain sympathy with people, and then takes as much money as she can before losing people's numbers. And to top it all off, she has totaled 6 cars in as many years, thankfully never hurting anyone else. But it's only a matter of time. She's currently laid up in the hospital because this last wreck almost ended her, and that would have been a kindness, actually. And if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 14. Old CEO for a company I used to work for. Every time we interacted, I felt like I was looking at evil incarnate. Luckily, the director I was under purposely acted as a buffer because I wouldn't have taken what he continually took. This CEO guy would verbally mistreat employees, clients, partners on a regular basis. Not just being mean, but screaming, veins and eyes popping out. He turned on one of my teammates one day for using the wrong verbiage with the confused caller. I ran over, put my hand on his chest, and pushed him away, telling him to stop. He turned to me with that evil look, and I matched his eyes and told him he better calm down or he'll regret it. I kind of saw him realize I was about to hurt him if he didn't calm down and scrambled back to his office. When the virus hit, he immediately let go half of our small company and cut the remaining employees' pay by 50%. I, of course, left, but funnily enough, I'm going back to the industry in a few weeks with a company that has a lot more reach and market share. Going to make it my job to steal most, if not all, of their accounts. Screw that guy. Story 15. Not much in the grand scheme of things on this thread, but so far, my ex of a few years. She cheated on me a few times. Whatever. Awful people are awful and isn't really the evil part. But it's just the way when I found out she cheated, she turned off her empathy pathway in her mind or something, like a sleeper agent that got activated. She used to be caring and soft, not really smart streetwise or people-wise, but great book smarts. But when I found out, went straight to cold, uncaring, awful, vindictive, and very smart people and had zero reason to. I gave her an easy out, no issues. She slept downstairs and planned to until the lease was up in her name, less than 28 days. I helped her with groceries as I had a car, helped her with everything really, making our eventual new life transition a lot easier. And that time, she went out with multiple guys, pretended I was stupid and wouldn't notice, treated our years together like an annoying stone in her shoe despite me basically building her entire life for her. 2 weeks into her last month, I noticed 2 random dudes at my house on my cat cam. On the day we planned on getting her to switch her energy provider to mine after work, she decided she'd just move out and try to take what she wanted from my house because I wasn't there. She played on the fact I trusted her to be neutral, to try and steal my stuff. After she had eventually moved out and left her cat and our cat at my place and never even said goodbye to them, she just pretended I or our cats didn't exist. Didn't want any of her leftover important documents, didn't want to say goodbye to her cat she had for an entire year before meeting me since she was a kitten. She blocked me on everything and cold cut contact despite the one thing I thought she wouldn't lie to me on was keeping in contact for any cats or bills left over. I've never seen anyone in my 25 years on this planet able to just cut off their own morality like that and change their personality that quick and cold like a hot knife through butter, and it really scared me, honestly. Like something just wasn't right with her upstairs that I had never seen or noticed before. Story 16. I knew a guy, sort of just a dude I knew in town for a few decades. He dated a good friend of mine, and she explained all the terrible things he'd done, like sleeping around, stealing, and selling her stuff, trying to get her to sign loans for him. She left, finally, when he tried to sell her to a friend of his for the night. So this guy just exists in my town and he does the same thing on repeat to everyone he meets. He gets a girlfriend and tells her he's a dom and she needs to be his sub, and then he tests her by making her do everything from giving him all their money to street work them out, making them get their friends in bed with him. He's branded a few girls, etc. Had dinner with him once. Can't remember the circumstances, but I saw him lift a pile of plates in a no-smoking restaurant and ash in the middle plate. He didn't even laugh or act like it was a joke or that anyone else should react. I watched him all night as he just did little things to mess people over. Unplugged a phone, grabbed a wallet and tossed it in the trash, etc., etc. He did these things out of habit. He wasn't angry, didn't know the people he was messing with. I went to take a whiz and grabbed the wallet up out of the trash and handed it to the owner saying, "I think you dropped this," or something. But the rest of it I just sort of watched in awe. He's probably still around. The last time I saw him was at the local club where he was ordering his girlfriend to make out with random dudes. When she got to me, I gave him a look and said, "No thanks, I don't even remember why I was there, but it's not my usual hangout." I hear about him from time to time, doing the same thing. He's always with some surprisingly pretty girl who always has a look on her face like her dog just passed away. I've met some awful people, but never another one as completely dedicated to being the center of chaos at all times. He ruins people like it's a full-time job. Story 17. It was a little old lady in a nursing home. Crazy, huh? No one wanted to get near her. The staff, it seemed, had no choice. I like that when she was admitted to the care center, her family must have celebrated their freedom. I think they possibly even gleefully snickered behind her backs. I had agreed to temporarily be the interim activity director while the administrator searched for a new hire. I'd volunteered at this nursing home for close to 5 years at the time and thought I knew all of the residents. I was being encouraged, begged really, to accept the position permanently. I was considering the offer. There was one resident room that I had been told to stay away from. As a volunteer, I had done so. As a staffer, I had to do assessments on all residents quarterly. I noticed this resident was way overdue. Her interaction with other residents was zero. Her participation in group activities was zero. One-on-one planned activities were charted as refused. Outside socializing and visits from family and friends never occurred. This individual needed socialization. She didn't even come out of her room for meals. She had never participated in her care plan meetings and not one trip to the in-house beauty shop. With the determination of a newbie, I prepared for her assessment. Armed with exciting and new ideas, I went to a room. I lightly knocked on the door. No response. It was just before lunch, and I knew they would have her up and ready for her meal. I knocked louder. Still no answers, so I barely cracked the door and was preparing to say, "Knock, knock, can I please come in?" I get the "knock" out of my mouth of knock and heard her shriek, "What the hell do you want?" I almost whizzed down my leg. I hadn't known what to expect, but it hadn't been that. I boldly entered the room and firmly began telling her my name and my intent. No was not an answer I would accept. But who the hell do you think you are, coming into my room without my permission and thinking you can tell me? Well, you have the picture. I may be writing refused in her chart after all. Her shrill and yelling had me almost out the door. I persisted, tried the polite, friendly, but firm approach. I tried the "it is state law that I do this" assessment approach. She screamed, help me, the devil is in here trying to end me," at the top of her lungs. I was getting offended and starting to get ticked. "I'm not the devil." I tried to convince her of that. She started screaming. Strangely, no one came in the door to see what was happening. I informed her that I would give her a chance to calm down and then I would return at 1 p.m. for her assessment. In truth, I was the only one needing to calm down. I was shaking so hard my knees knocked together as I left the room. Behind me, the shrieking continued, accusing me of doing terribly gross things to her. Ahead of me, the dining room was filled with calm residents, and the staff seemed unfazed as they went about their mealtime duties. Not one person looked up as I walked by, red face, sweat pouring off my brow, and tears in my eyes. I guess they had heard it all before. The evil thing in that forbidden room and I had achieved only two things during our meeting. She had successfully refused my assessment, and my decision was made. I would not be accepting the offer of this job. Story 18. A coworker who would thrive off the misery of others, including her best friend, who was another coworker of ours. Let's call her Friend. Friend had trouble getting pregnant and spent a lot of time and money on treatments, IVF and such. Every time those treatments failed again and again, making Friend miserable and devastated when her period came around. So every month, a coworker made sure to shove her baby's pictures in Friend's face every time after a failed treatment. Other coworkers tried to make her aware of this, but she continued to pester her best friend, specifically the day when Friend got her period or the day after. She said the timing was just a coincidence every time, and that she had the right to show people her baby when she wanted. When seeing the baby pictures, Friend just ran to the bathroom crying every time with me following to try and comfort her. Who needs enemies with best friends like that, I guess? Glad I don't work there anymore. Story 19. It's either Paul Ryan, Hunter Harrison, or William Gardner. We all know Paul Ryan and his evil plan to turn Social Security over to Wall Street so they can earn big fees playing with our money in the Social Security Trust Fund. Hunter Harrison is a guy who brought us precision scheduled railroading, an oxymoron of a term that left 3 of my rail cars on a siding in Canada for 20 days during my peak season, and the longer trains that have a greater propensity to derail. William Gardner was the owner of the Wisconsin Southern Railroad who broke the employment contracts of the managers of a railroad he bought, saying he couldn't afford them, then flew his Learjet to Florida for the weekend to play golf. He also is a convicted felon after making employees give donations to Scott Walker and reimbursing the employees, a clear violation of campaign finance laws. Also, a really creepy guy regarding women. Wisconsin Southern is now owned by a different company. Well, at least then we wouldn't have to worry about corporate overlords or economic inequality. Wait, that's probably been tried before. Story 20. I've never personally known any criminals, as far as I know, so this may seem rather tame, but I had this neighbor in my building who was always doing things like blasting music in his apartment at 3 a.m., taking people's parking spaces, smoking in the lobby, that kind of thing. And I remember thinking of him as just a really terrible guy. As it turns out, those things were the least of his awfulness. A few years later, I saw an article in the paper that his real estate license was revoked and was charged by state prosecutors. Apparently, he had a large real estate business. Due to a track record of severely mistreating tenants to try to get them to leave units so he could rent then to higher rates, by doing things like shutting off power and water and even hiring goons to threaten them, and apparently robbing his own cousin who mentored him of millions of dollars. He was also accused in a class action lawsuit of renting homes from elderly people who were vacationing elsewhere, severely damaging them, then pressuring them to sell the house to him at a lowball price rather than try suing him hopelessly. I think he was the worst person that I ever personally knew. And if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.